a video on forecasting in Excel. As a lead up to this video, you should be familiar with, first of all, how to generate linear regression in Excel, and then how to use those coefficients from your model to generate predicted values for each entry of your data. Now, up to this point, we've generally been talking about data that is either in the current period or maybe lagged by 1 month or lagged by 1 year. But if we have this data, which covers every month like this data does, so here we're looking at live steer prices of every month, and then they have the consumer price index so that they can create a real steer price variable adjusted for inflation with 2018 as the base year. So the task here is we want to know how many lags we should include in our model. In other words, how many months back does the live steer price explain live steer price in the current period, adjusted for inflation? So over here, in our example, it's talking about the Akaike information criterion, the AIC, which tells us if we add one more variable to our model, is it a good idea or a bad idea? In other words, how many lags should we use? So here what this is showing is the equation for the AIC, and what it spits out is a number, and we can compare that number between models. For example, this is the AIC with 4 lags, 1, 2, 3, and 12 months. And we could compare the AIC to a model with, say, only 1 lag or 2 lags. And the textbook tells us the lower this value is, the greater amount of information contained in the regression, or in other words, we want to use the number of lags which has the highest AIC. Right? So if you're doing some forecasting work in the future, just kind of keep in mind that you might be interested in knowing how many lags of data that you want to use in your forecasting. This can be a helpful tool. Right, so we've created our predicted variable, our predicted value over here based on the coefficients from our model down here, and then the actual values that we observe of these variables in each period. Right, so we created that and there was an example of how to do that in the last video. Then we auto-filled it down. We can go all the way to the bottom here. The last month that we have is 12 2019. These are on the first of the month. So this is the beginning of December 2019. And we might ask the question, okay, well, what about January of 2020? We don't observe any data in January of 2020. We don't know what the steer price was. But what we can do is predict it based on our previous values. So one thing that might be helpful when we're working at the bottom of our sheet here would be to freeze some panes for ourselves. Good enough so that we can see. All right, so we have our real steer price in this month, which we don't know, but we do know what it was the month before. We do know what it was 2 months before and 3 months before and 12 months before last December. So, did I go one too far? Nope, it just auto-filled down here. So then again, what happens here is we don't have the real value, but we can predict based on our previous values and then the same equation that we used to generate our predicted value column. Right? Again, we have our coefficients times the values in any given month. If we're using this lag data, we don't have the present month, but we have some past months. So we can use that to predict by inserting our past month's data here into the same equation, which tells us the impact of 1, 2, 3, and 12-month lags. All right, we can also compare these lags to each other. All right, so these are pretty much direct comparisons. So here we have a positive value. Here we have a negative value, and both are significant. So that's kind of interesting, and we might want to do a little bit more research as to why that could be. Okay, so in general, here for forecasting, we just use the same tools that we were using in previous videos to generate an equation with our predicted values based on the values in our model. And then we can use that to predict future values that we want to predict, in this case, 1 month into the future.